Have you ever wondered why witchcraft often conjures images of malevolence and fear? Why is it that society's perception of witches has been so clouded by myth and misinformation? Indeed, the term witchcraft sparks a myriad of thoughts and emotions. From the depiction of hag-faced figures stirring cauldrons in early Christian Europe to the benevolent suburban housewives in pop culture, the representation of witches has evolved significantly. Yet the real history of witchcraft is far from these portrayals. It's a history rooted in misunderstood natural healers or wise women, practitioners of witchcraft using magic spells and calling upon spirits. The Bible even records one of the earliest instances of a witch, with the story of King Saul seeking the Witch of Endor. But there's so much more to this story, so much more to uncover. Let's dive into the often misunderstood world of witchcraft and debunk some of the myths we've held onto for centuries. Witchcraft has its roots deep in our history, with the earliest records dating back to biblical times. These early practitioners of witchcraft were often misunderstood. They were the healers, the wise women, the ones who knew how to harness the power of nature and use it in ways that seemed magical to others. They used spells and incantations, called upon spirits, and were seen as a bridge between the natural and supernatural worlds. One of the earliest recorded instances of a witch comes from the Bible, in the story of King Saul seeking the Witch of Endor. In this tale, the Witch of Endor is summoned to bring the spirit of the prophet Samuel back from the dead so that he can advise King Saul. This story reflects the perception of witches during this time. They were seen as powerful beings who could interact with the spirit world. But as with many things in history, the perception of witches and their craft was set to undergo a dramatic change. Though witches started as respected figures, they became feared and misunderstood. This fear was fueled by religious and societal shifts that painted these wise women as evil beings. That was the beginning. But the perception of witches and witchcraft dramatically changed in the mid-1400s. In the mid-1400s, Europe was gripped by a wave of witch hysteria, leading to widespread witch hunts and executions. This wave of terror wasn't confined to Europe alone. It reached the New World, its most infamous manifestation being the Salem witch trials. Here, around 150 people were accused of practicing witchcraft, and 18 were executed. Other colonies, such as Connecticut and Virginia, also experienced their fair share of witch trials, albeit with fewer executions. But what fueled this witch mania? Well, let's turn back the pages of history to the year 1486. This was when a book titled Malleus Maleficarum was published. This book, often referred to as the Hammer of Witches, played a significant role in escalating the witch hysteria. It outlined how to identify, interrogate, and prosecute those suspected of witchcraft. It was like a guidebook for witch hunters, and its influence was far-reaching. These witch trials were often brutal and unfair. Many of those accused were just natural healers or wise women whose practices were misunderstood. Some were simply victims of societal and political scapegoating. It's hard to pinpoint the exact number, but it's believed that between the years 1500 and 1660, up to 80,000 suspected witches were put to death across Europe. The witch trials were a dark chapter in our history, but how does witchcraft fare in our modern times? In our modern enlightened age, witches and witchcraft have taken on a different meaning. No longer are they seen as malevolent figures stirring potions in a cauldron. Instead, they are often individuals practicing Wicca, a contemporary pagan witchcraft religion. These modern-day witches seek to live peaceful and balanced lives in harmony with nature and humanity. They believe in the reverence of the natural world and the cycles of the moon and seasons. They celebrate the divine in all living things, cherishing the earth and the universe as sacred. Witchcraft today is not about causing harm or seeking personal gain at the expense of others. Rather, it is about fostering healing, protection, and positive transformation. Spells and incantations, the tools of their craft, are used with these benevolent intentions in mind. However, it's essential to remember that witchcraft is a broad term, encompassing a variety of practices and beliefs worldwide. Some practitioners might not identify as witches, and their practices can significantly differ. Yet, despite the evolution of witchcraft and the shift towards a more peaceful and protective form of the craft, challenges remain. Witches, and those perceived as witches, still face persecution and violence in some parts of the world. This persecution is a grim reminder of the past, a stark contrast to the enlightened understanding of witchcraft many now hold. While witchcraft has evolved over the centuries, witches still face persecution and violence in some parts of the world. As we have seen, the perception of witchcraft has changed dramatically over the centuries. From the early days, where witches were portrayed as hag-faced and evil, stirring their cauldrons and casting wicked spells, the tide has shifted significantly. Many of these early witches were simply misunderstood, wise women practicing natural healing, but they fell victim to the fear and hysteria of the times. The dark period of witch hunts and executions, where as many as 80,000 suspected witches lost their lives, remains a bloody stain on our history. It was a time of fear and misunderstanding, fueled by the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum. Even the New World wasn't exempt from this hysteria, with the Salem witch trials being the most infamous example. But as we move into the present, we see a different picture. Modern witches, often practitioners of Wicca, aim to live balanced lives in harmony with nature and humanity. They use their spells and incantations for healing and protection, not harm. Society's perception of witchcraft has been shaped by history, fear, and misunderstanding. It's time to shed light on this misunderstood practice and acknowledge its place in our collective history.